Assalamu alaikum. The topic for today is budget line, indifference curve and consumer equilibrium. Budget line is a graph which shows different combinations of two products that can be produced with the help of given resources. ये कॉन्सेप्ट आपके एएस में जो आप लोगों ने प्रोडक्शन पॉसिबिलिटी कर्व पढ़ा था उससे काफ़ी इसका कनेक्शन है. प्रोडक्शन पॉसिबिलिटी कर्व में ये होता था कि हम ये देखते हैं कि production possibility curve shows different combinations of two products that can be produced with the help of given resources by the producer. Budget line shows different combinations of two products, one on x and other on y axis, to show how much quantities of two goods can be purchased by the consumer with given income or resources. So let's have a look on different situations of budget line graphically. We plot x good on x axis. X good mean any kind of good, it can be light bulb, or on y axis we show another good named as y good, and it can be another good like it can be fan, or we draw a budget line and this budget line shows how much maximum quantities of x and y can be purchased by the consumer. At combination A, for example, we can see that consumer can purchase B1 quantity of y good and A1 quantity of x good, and at combination B, consumer can purchase B2 quantity of y good and A2 quantity of x good. So to get more units of x good, consumer has to reduce some units of y good. It is basic assumption. It is basic assumption that we have limited budget. Whenever we want to purchase more quantities of one good, we have to reduce some quantities of another good. It is a natural phenomena. We cannot purchase greater quantities of both good with our fixed income. For example, if you have 100 rupees and you have to purchase banana or apple, if you purchase banana for 100 rupees, then it means you cannot purchase apples. If you purchase apples worth 100 rupees, then it means you cannot purchase banana. However, you have multiple options to purchase some quantities of banana and some quantities of apples. If you want to purchase more quantities of banana, then you will have to sacrifice some apples. This is a natural thing. Now let's have a look on effects or shifts in budget line, and budget line shifts because of three effects. The first effect is called income. Now we will have a look on income effect, and if we suppose that there is rise in income of consumer, then what will happen to the budget line? Let's have a look on the graph, and initially we have axis. On x axis we can show x good, and on y we can show y good. Draw a budget line, initial budget line, and we can label this budget line as AB. And if there is rise in income increases purchasing power of consumer, so consumer would be able to purchase greater quantities, so budget line will shift from AB to A1 B1 to the right. And the second situation is fall in income. If there is fall in income, then consumers purchasing power will decrease. Consumer would be able to purchase lesser quantities of x and y good. Again, label axis and draw a budget line, initial budget line, which can be labeled as AB. And now if there is fall in income, then purchasing power will fall and budget line will completely shift to the left from AB to A1 B1. Okay, so we have seen that rise in income shifts budget line completely to the right, which shows that now consumers purchasing power has increased, and fall in income shifts budget line completely to the left, showing that there is fall in purchasing power of consumer. Keep in mind one important thing, that budget line shows only purchasing power of consumer. The second situation which shifts budget line is price effect, and we suppose that there is fall in price of x. Px stand for price of x. Label now if there is fall in price of x, it means purchasing power of consumer has increased to purchase greater quantities of x good and only, so the purchasing power for y is remaining the same. So budget line will pivotal shift to the right on x axis. Now the second situation is rise in price of x. If there is rise in price of x, it means purchasing power of consumer to purchase X good will fall, and so budget line will shift from A to A2. The blue line shows basically the new budget line, which is after the rise in price of X. Now let's see the substitution effect and changes in consumer equilibrium. In substitution effect, if we suppose that there is fall in price of X, then consumer considers that his purchasing power for X has increased relative to purchasing power of Y good. So let's see how it will change the budget line. Let's see, initial budget line is AB, and if there is fall in price of X, consumer thinks that his purchasing power for X has increased relative to Y. So budget line will shift like this. So quantity of X that consumer can purchase is A1, and quantity of Y that consumer can purchase is B1. So his purchasing power for X has increased while the purchasing power for Y has decreased. Okay, next is the indifference curve and its properties. Indifference curve is a graph which shows different combinations of two products that can be purchased with the given income or budget, and all combinations give equal level of satisfaction to the consumer. In left hand side, top left hand side graph is the indifference curve, which shows that if consumer purchases at combination A or at combination B, he gets the same level of satisfaction, that is 100 units. So indifference curve, the word indifference means when it makes no difference for the consumer whether to purchase X or Y, he gets exactly same level of satisfaction. So combination A or combination B both will give 100 units of satisfaction to the consumer. Next is properties of indifference curve. The first property is that it is always convex to the origin. Convex to the origin IC curve means that every combination will give the same level of satisfaction. You can relate this concept with unitary demand curve, which you discussed in AS level, and unit elastic demand curve shows that whatever price is, consumer has to pay the same expenditure and the producer gets the same revenue. So there is no change in revenue of consumer, and there is no change in expenditure of the consumer. So same concept is applicable here, that every point at IC curve gives the same level of satisfaction. The second property is that multiple ICs in single map can be there, but higher IC gives high level of satisfaction and lower IC gives lower level of satisfaction. As per figure 2, IC gives 100 units of satisfaction at each combination at each level, and IC1 gives 150 units of satisfaction, and IC2 gives 200 units of satisfaction to the consumer. But keep in mind that every point at IC2 will give equal level of satisfaction, that is 200 units, and every combination at IC shows 100 units of satisfaction whether consumer purchases greater quantity of Y or lesser quantity of Y. So it gives him equal level of satisfaction. The third property of indifference curve is that two ICs will never intersect each other in a single map. What does this mean? If two IC curves intersect each other, then the second property will become invalid. For example, if we have IC curve IC1 and IC2, if they intersect each other, then the previous property number 2 will become wrong, because at combination AB, IC1 gives more satisfaction and IC2 gives less satisfaction. At point C, both give same level of satisfaction, and at point D, IC2 gives more level of satisfaction and IC1 gives less satisfaction, and it negates the previous property that higher IC gives higher satisfaction and lower IC gives lower level of satisfaction. The fourth property is it can never be horizontal, vertical or positively sloped straight line. Why it cannot be horizontal straight line? Let's have a look on this graph. We plot X and Y, and IC curve, if it is horizontal, then it will look like this. So this IC curve shows that if consumer purchases Y1 quantity of Y good, then he can purchase x1 quantity of x good, or either he can purchase x2 quantity of x good, which is against the basic property that whenever consumer purchases more quantity of one good, he has to reduce some quantity of y good. But in this situation, he is getting the same quantity of y good, but he can increase quantity of x. Similarly, if it is vertical straight line, then again it is against the basic property, because this shows that we can purchase x2 quantity of x good even if we purchase y2 quantity, y1 quantity, or y3 quantity of y good. But again it is against the basic property that whenever we purchase more quantities of one good, we have to sacrifice some units of another good. But in this situation, we are getting more units of y, but we are not sacrificing x good. Next is consumer equilibrium. So we will now combine the concept of budget line and IC curve in a single graph to show consumer equilibrium. Consumer equilibrium is a point where budget line is tangent to indifference curve, and we can draw budget line AB and then IC curve. So budget line is tangent to IC curve at point E, where consumer purchases y1 quantity of y good and x1 quantity of x good. So x and y are two goods. They can be any two goods, like one can be banana and other can be apple, or one can be light bulb and the other can be let's say fans and AC and television, any two products. So x, y means any two products. So E is the only point at which equilibrium takes place, because at point A or at point B equilibrium cannot take place, because our budget line AB does not meet that point. It means point A is not consumer is not able to purchase at point A, because IC curve at point A is beyond the budget constraint of consumer. Same is the case with combination B. Combination B is much beyond the budget of the consumer, so he cannot purchase this much. So the only combination he can purchase is E, so it will give him maximum satisfaction. Consumer equilibrium is not always stagnant and constant. It keeps changing with the changes in three main elements, and those are: number one is income effect, number two is price effect, and number three is substitution effect. So these three effects basically change the consumer equilibrium. How these three effects change consumer equilibrium, we can see it in detail. The first situation is income effect. So we suppose that there is rise in income. This is the condition we are applying to this certain situation, but examiner may keep changing these situations. So there is rise in income, and we consider that the product is a normal good or the product is an inferior good. Okay, normal goods, as we have already seen that in AS level, that there is positive relationship between income and quantity demand for normal goods. What does this mean? This means that income and demand for normal goods move in same direction. What is this relationship? Like if income increases, consumer will demand more, and vice versa. Inferior goods are negatively related to the level of income, which means that if income increases, consumer will purchase less quantity, and if income falls, consumer will purchase more quantity. So income and demand are negatively related. Now let's see how these effects can be shown with the help of budget line and indifference curve by changing consumer equilibrium. So in this figure, on x-axis we are considering normal good, or in the second graph, right hand side graph, x good is considered as inferior good. So if there is rise in income, how consumer equilibrium will change, we can see it clearly. Like in left hand side graph, first of all draw a budget line and label this budget line as AB. AB is just a notation, you can write it AA or BB or anything, and repeat the same process in right hand side graph. Draw budget line AB, and now draw an equilibrium point at point E, where budget line is tangent to IC curve, and consumer purchases x1 quantity of normal good. And repeat the same process in right hand side graph. Draw an indifference curve, and budget line is tangent to IC curve at point E, where consumer purchases X1 quantity of inferior good. Now what will happen if there is rise in income of consumer? Rise in income shows increase in purchasing power of consumer, so budget line will shift from A1 to B1 in left hand side graph as well as in right hand side graph, because whenever there is rise in income, it increases purchasing power irrespective of type of goods. It shows how much maximum quantities you can purchase. So we will consider this point that rise in income will completely shift budget line to the right. However, in left hand side graph, new equilibrium will take place at E1, where consumer purchases X2 quantity of normal good, which is greater than the previous quantity, but so the gap between X1 and X2 is income effect. But in right hand side graph, in case of inferior good, when income increases, budget line will no doubt shift to the right from AB to A1 B1, but consumer will purchase lesser quantity of inferior good at X2 and new equilibrium will take place at E1. Next is price effect, and price again affects the consumer's purchasing power. Fall in price increases purchasing power of consumer, and rise in price decreases purchasing power of consumer. So we will see both situations, fall in price of X and then rise in price of X, and we will show them graphically to make the concept really very clear. Okay, now the first situation first, and draw axis, label two goods, quantities of any two goods. One is, let's say, X good and the other one is Y good, and X good is considered as normal good. Okay, so this is the basic structure of the graph, and draw a budget line, label this budget line as AB, and this is not again necessary to label budget line as AB. You can label it any two goods on X and Y goods. Then in right hand side graph, we have again normal good on X and neutral good on Y axis. Again draw a budget line AB. So in both situations the basic graph is exactly same. We draw the same graph, and in case of normal good, when price falls, quantity demand will rise, and same is the case when price rises, quantity demand will fall, and it follows the law of demand, basic law of demand, which we discussed in already discussed in AS level. So fall in price of X will shift budget line on X axis only. So the new budget line is BB, and suppose initial equilibrium was at point E and consumer purchases X1 quantity of normal good. Now fall in price of normal good increases its quantity demand, so quantity will increase from X1 to X2 and new equilibrium will take place at E1, which is at new budget line. Now let's have a look on right hand side graph, where price of X, PX stand for rise in price of X. Okay, when price of X increases, budget line will pivotal shift from BA to B1, and initially consumer was purchasing X quantity of normal good. Now he will purchase lesser quantity of normal good, that is X1. So the purchasing power of consumer has decreased, and being normal good he purchases less. The last situation is substitution effect on consumer equilibrium. Again draw the same graph, label two goods, one on X and other on Y axis. Now draw a budget line, same. Now let's have a look on substitution effect, and we have the condition that there is fall in price of X, and in case of substitution effect we basically consider the relative impact of fall in price of one good on not only on the same product but on the other product as well. For example, in this figure we have initial budget line AB showing different combinations of X and Y that can be maximum purchased by the consumer, and initial equilibrium is, let's say, at point E. Now if there is fall in, then consumer thinks that his purchasing power for X has increased relative to Y, so his budget line will shift from AB to A1 B1, which shows that his purchasing power for X has increased but purchasing power for Y has decreased. As a basic principle, we draw a single IC curve which becomes tangent to both budget lines AB and A1 B1. Initial equilibrium was at point A, and we draw IC curve which creates tangency at point E as well as E1 on the new budget line. Now the next is we have to prove that price effect is equal to substitution effect plus income effect, and we suppose that there is fall in price of X. Draw a basic graph, and that is budget line is AB, initial equilibrium let's say is at point E, and we draw a part of indifference curve, not complete IC curve, and we can see that X1 quantity of X good is purchased by the consumer. Let's say it is 5 units of X. Fall in price of X shifts budget line from BA to BA1, which shows that purchasing power of consumer has increased for X good, and X is considered as a normal good. So new equilibrium will take place at some point which shows greater quantity of X good which is purchased by the consumer because it is now less costly, so consumer will purchase more quantity, that is let's say X2 quantity of normal good, and X2 is any quantity, so it can be let's say 15 units. So consumer was initially purchasing 5 units, now he is purchasing 15 units. Another really very important information here is that now we consider that if budget line shifts from BA to BA1, it shows increase in purchasing power of consumer. If we keep purchasing power of consumer constant, then there will be a substitution effect showing complete leftward shift, parallel shift in budget line. Now the budget line was BA, which is red line, and it will shift from BA to the left, and that budget line is labeled as, you can label it any using any alphabets, but I am labeling it as CC. So it again shows CC and BA lines show the substitution effect. So for substitution effect we need not to draw another IC curve, we will extend the same IC curve and new equilibrium will take place at E2, and we can now complete the initial IC curve which was drawn partially, and now we can complete it as IC. So the new equilibrium will take place at E2, and the new quantity as per substitution effect, if consumer's purchasing power is kept constant, he would be able to purchase X3 quantity of normal good. And this is an imaginary budget line, it is not actual line. If we just consider that if his purchasing power was kept constant, then he could have purchased maximum 8 units or X3 quantity of X good. So the substitution effect in this situation is at E and E2. So 8 minus 5 is plus 3, and income effect is 15 minus 8, so it is plus 7. So the overall effect is positive, and net effect would be positive, and that is equal to plus 10. Okay, the one thing is really very important to keep in mind, that if income and substitution effects both are moving in the same direction, in this situation substitution effect is moving to the right and income effect is also moving to the right, they are moving in same direction, so both will be considered as positive figures. So income and substitution effect both are positive in this situation. Okay, now we have separated the income and substitution effect in this overall situation, and we can now prove that price effect is equal to income effect plus substitution effect. In this scenario, price effect is from x1 to x2. So 15 minus 5 is our price effect. We will put the value 15 minus 5, and income effect is 15 minus 8, and that is plus 7, and substitution effect is 8 minus 5, which is 3. Now 15 minus 5 is equal to 10, and 7 plus 3 is also 10. So prove that price effect is always equal to substitution effect and income effect. Prove that price effect is equal to income effect plus substitution effect. And the next situation is inferior good case, and we will prove the same condition, that price effect is equal to income effect plus substitution effect, or we can say that price effect is equal to substitution effect plus income effect. Both will give exactly same meaning, and we have the condition that price of x falls. Draw an initial budget line, that is AB, find an equilibrium at point E, and draw partially indifference curve, and consumer purchases x1 quantity of inferior good. Now if there is fall in price of x, then there will be a pivotal shift in budget line from BA to BA1, and the new budget line is red line. New budget line is BA1, which shows that consumers' purchasing power for inferior good has increased. Okay, now we will find another equilibrium at new budget line BA1, that is red budget line, and new equilibrium is suppose at point E1, where consumer purchases x2 quantity of inferior good, and let's say x2 quantity of inferior good, let's say this quantity is 7 units. Okay, and we have to draw indifference curve at point E1 to show it as an equilibrium, an official equilibrium. Now we have to draw an imaginary budget line to which considers that if consumers purchasing power is kept constant, what could he has been able to purchase. So the blue line would be the imaginary budget line, which is below the original red line, and this shows that consumers purchasing power has increased. Whenever imaginary budget line is below the actual budget line, it shows that consumers purchasing power has increased. So we will complete the initial IC curve, which we partially drawn previously at point A, and now it will be extended to E2. Now new equilibrium is at E2, and where consumer would have purchased if his purchasing power was kept constant, x3 quantity of x good, which is 10. Okay, in this situation substitution effect is from x1 to x3. Again, I will reinforce the same thing, that when two lines are crossing each other, the equilibrium at these two lines would be the substitution effect. So line BA and CC are intersecting each other, so equilibrium E and E2 are the substitution effects. Now we can find the income effect, that is the difference between two parallel lines. So equilibrium quantity on two parallel lines BA and CC are, one equilibrium is at point E1 and the other is at E2. So income effect is between E1 and E2, that is 10 minus 7, and the total effect or net effect would be the gap between 7 and 5, or x2 and x1. Income effect is equal to 7 minus 10 is equal to minus 3. Now in this situation arrows are moving in opposite direction, so substitution effect is moving towards right, so it would be positive, and income effect is moving towards left backward, so income effect would be negative. Income effect is going is equal to minus 3 against the substitution effect. So income effect is equal to 7 minus 10, and substitution effect is equal to, and substitution effect is equal to 10 minus 5, which is equal to plus 5. So the net effect would be plus 2. Okay, in case of inferior good, you must keep in mind that in case of inferior good, income effect is negative and substitution effect is positive. Now we have to prove that price effect is equal to income effect plus substitution effect. We have the values. Price effect is 7 minus 5 and income effect is minus 3 and substitution effect is 5 plus 5. So 7 minus 5 is equal to plus 2 and minus 3 plus 5 is equal to plus 2. So again prove that price effect is equal to income effect plus substitution effect. Next concept is derivation of demand curve using indifference curve and budget line. And the first condition is basically there is fall in price of X and we have X good which is normal good. So draw two graphs, and graph we show quantity of X good which is normal good on X axis and quantity of another good that is Y good, let's say, on Y axis. And in the lower panel we have price on Y axis and quantity demand of X on X axis, because in AS you have already studied that demand curve shows the relationship between price and quantity demand. So on X we have quantity demand and on Y we have price. Suppose we have initial price $10 and it falls to $8, then let's see how it will have impact on consumer equilibrium and demand curve. Draw initial budget line BA and draw an initial equilibrium at point E, and IC curve is I. So draw perpendicular to find out quantity. So initially quantity is Q and we got a point A where perpendicular from equilibrium intersects price $10. And now if there is fall in price of X, then let's see how budget line will change. Fall in price of X will shift budget line from BA to BA1, let's say, or BB1. Okay, and new equilibrium will take place at point E1 because it is normal good and fall in price of normal good increases its quantity. So new equilibrium will take place at E1, and we can again draw perpendicular to find out quantity demand, and quantity demand is Q1, and this perpendicular intersects price line $8 at point B. Now join point A and B to get a demand curve. So this is a normal demand curve which is negatively sloped, and it confirms the scenario which we already discussed in AS level. Now if the X good is a giffen good, then how it will affect demand curve and what will be the shape of demand curve in this situation. Initially we have budget line AB and we have prices $10 and $8 in lower panel, and initial equilibrium was, let's see, at point E where budget line BA is tangent to IC curve, and find quantity Q. And initially since price was $10, so intersection point of $10 price is labeled here. And now if there is fall in price of X, there will be a pivotal shift in budget line on X axis, and this yellow line, new yellow line, would be the new budget line, showing that now consumers purchasing power is A1 for giffen good, and giffen good is basically the good which is worst quality product and consumer does not purchase it or purchases very less quantity whenever his purchasing power increases. So new equilibrium will take place at E1, which shows that now consumer will purchase lesser quantity of giffen good which is X good. So new quantity is Q1 and initial point was A and subsequent point is B. If we join these points, we will get a demand curve which is exceptional demand curve and it is positively sloped. Again keep in mind, giffen good is the good which has exceptional demand curve which looks like supply curve and positively sloped. When its price falls, consumer purchases less quantity because fall in price increases his purchasing power, and consumer will not purchase more quantity of giffen good or worst quality product when his purchasing power increases.